All right. So we're going to chat a little bit about the Sugar Labs Vision page, um, and hopefully Sean will be able to join us. I guess the eBay thing that I threw up the other day has also kind of pulled this up. One of the main questions and seems unresolved for me is about the protocol going forward.
There's tons of static on the line. I can't hear anything but static.
Is that better?
Nope.
Might be Eli because he keeps coming to the foreground.
So I've muted him. And he's unmuted now.
Much better.
Yeah?
Clearly those font people are just noisy.
But yeah, so I was saying, I guess, in terms of the vision, I think the number one thing for me is the extent to which, XO should be supported going forwards. And Sam and I, have had a bit of a discussion about that on the list. But I'm curious, what you think, Laura.
No, I think that I think we have to continue supporting XO, but I think we can reframe a little bit the way in which we message it, because the part of the idea behind the XO is that it's sort of a low footprint, low power machine. Mm-hmm. And since there aren't many of those out there, but I think the idea that Sugar can run on pretty bare iron, pretty low end stuff, I think is an important message, that we can that schools can recycle their old computers and use them for Sugar, that you can use it on a hand-me-down computer, that kind of message. I think the fact that we're able to run on these XO1s it's a slightly different message than, oh, we're part of OPC, but I think it's a reframing that takes us to the next platform, whatever that might be.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. There was the chip, the getchip.com computer for $50, which has a little screen and a little keyboard and a slate design for $50. And the guys, I emailed them about them. I forwarded this to the list. They have Sugar running on it. They actually considered Sugar as their sort of default desktop UI, but they found that currently Sugar, as packaged for Debian, which may not be the latest version, I'm not sure, but the Sugar package that they tried, it was in Debian, was really not meant for their screen resolution, and that their particular resolution, it wasn't responsively scaling well.
I'm curious to find out what the actual resolution was they're running at, but yeah, I can believe that there's certainly going to be a lot of apps that were, even today, not every app got modified to not be 1200 by 900 pixels. Mm-hmm. That was sort of a lot of things. A lot of early apps hard-coded that.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that and then there's some other apps that just were designed for a reasonable amount of screen space. Because you have to think differently when it gets small. As, again, you font designers know in your sleep.
Mm-hmm. So that being the case, then I posted this information about the kernel requirements. That currently the XO1 image that's developed by James Cameron is Fedora 18 based, because that's the latest version of Fedora that will work with the private kernel that OLPC maintains, and that the latest Fedora 23, 24 will not boot because it needs a newer kernel, and newer kernels haven't had all the changes upstreamed, so they don't work.
For XO1 and 1.5, they're largely upstreamed. It's just the ARM processors that were never upstreamed. However, the newer versions of the kernels do suffer a bit from the fact they have, and newer user lands suffer a bit from the fact that they have not been supported in terms of, not tested, I should say. So like we had when we tried putting a newer Fedora in Network Manager, went into a big spinning loop when it encountered the XO1 mesh network interface. And on the XO1.5, we know the camera driver got broken by someone, and someone has to come in and do that, look at that. One point I had a side conversation where Peter Robinson thought he might be able to get us some volunteer kernel developer time. But that was a while back, so I don't know the current status of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's you know, sort of one of the tough things. I think that it's not even clear to me, you know, if Fedora is a good distro for the XO1, because you know, newer versions, Fedora 23, 24, 25, 26. You know, looking forward to the next 18 months, these are going to, you know, be bigger and bigger. You know, as the general.
Those don't work. None of them along that road work. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just telling somebody something here. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, as Fedora gets newer, it's going to work less well on the XO1. And since we're, you know, if we're setting the bar at the XO1, then you know, we have to work within that. And so maybe using a more niche distro, you know, which like you know, Puppy Linux or something, that's really intended for super low power capacity computers would be better than Fedora.
We would say, do we necessarily have to keep everything backward compatible, or would it be acceptable to say have a video editing application that's like a newer version of Record, which was not, or could run at higher resolutions and a 640 by 480 camera included on all XOs?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that it makes sense for us to push very hard on the kernel issues with the old hardware. What I do think is a better place for us to invest our energy is to make sure that you know, things like the screen resolution issue that are keeping us off of new low-cost hardware get resolved. That seems like a better place to invest in terms of engineering time.
Right. So you're okay with just being stuck on Fedora 18, but Fedora 18 doesn't have GTK, you know, 3.20 package, for example. So you know, this is kind of what I'm saying is, as Fedora gets newer, then what works on the XO1 is going to get older and older.
Well, I mean, the biggest issue on XO1, because I mean, you know, I think that a lot of the bug fixes, a lot of the improvements we've made in Sugar, and a lot of the things that we've gotten from newer versions of GDK in general are great, but they're not showstoppers. The only place where I think we really hit a wall is with the browser. That's the one place where I don't know what to do with that, because you can't use these old browsers that are supported on the old hardware on modern websites. So it's not a matter of the browser not working, it's a matter of the browser not, you know, being qualified to use Gmail.
Right, right.
Things like that. So I don't know what we can do about that. I mean, that seems...
So isn't there a WebKit 2 branch of the browser activity that's up to date?
No, the browse activity is up to date, but the libraries, the dependencies of the new browse won't run on that old hardware. Won't run on that old kernel, as far as I understand.
But you're moving to a newer version of WebKit that's not on, that James hasn't backported?
Right.
And in any case, WebKit in particular has to be custom compiled for X01 because it's one of those that has a just-in-time compiler, which likes adding the newer CPU instructions in and throws an exception on an X01.
So it's just, I mean, yeah, I mean, to me, if we could somehow figure out some strategy for getting the web browser to work, I don't think anything else really matters in terms of supporting that old hardware.
Well, I mean, I think that
just in terms of practicality of how people use it.
Well, I mean, we've already hit this in the font editor where we wanted to use Flowbox for laying out a glyph table, and we can't because GTK that is available on the X01 doesn't support it.
Right, and you know, we're using a lot of you know, things like grid in general in the interface these days, and that's a relatively new GTK feature. You know, there is the possibility of backporting some of the new GTK stuff to older versions of Fedora, but and again, I think I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to say, you know, look, we've got a bunch of new stuff, but it's not going to run on X01. But it is going to run on these newer low-cost platforms.
And unless we get the support, it's not going to run on the newer Xos either. They're all Fedora 18 right now.
Right. So that's exactly. So for me, you know, if we're not going to try and focus, you know, sort of developer interest on, you know, getting the latest GTK to work on Fedora 18, the kernel stuff I think is harder than, you know, I mean, I guess maybe it's related. Is GTK tied to the kernel?
I don't know if there's anything that's kernel related in terms of getting the new GTK bits on there.
Maybe more tied into like the X server or systemd, dare I say it. But
right.
Or GNOME at least the systemd.
Right. Well, so I mean, I think that it's important for Sugar to have a reference hardware. You know, there needs to be some device, and even if it changed every release, that would be fine. In a similar way to Google having the Nexus system for Android. So you know that each time Android comes out, there's a Nexus device, and you know that there's been that slightly tighter integration between the operating system and the hardware, and that's a kind of a reference device that you can compare other vendors' devices to in the market. So I think really for the vision, you know, we're going to have one more release this year. The vision only has to be for this year, and we can review it again, you know, later on. So for 0.110, what is the reference hardware that we have in mind for this?
I think you're getting into one of the classic questions of, does there need to be a hardware platform?
There does need to be one. There needs to be one. That's absolutely. I very strongly asserting that.
I agree there's to be some sort of platform where someone can try and say, this is where we know it's going to work well and good. But if you say took like an X01 and you compared it to even, dare I say, an XO tablet, and you say, oh look, I can install my standard Android apps on this thing that looks largely the same. Someone nowadays might pick, and it plays videos and all this stuff, someone might just say take the XO tablet, even though the XO learning has nothing to do with Sugar apart from borrowing the icons and terminology.
I'm sorry, Sam, I didn't quite follow you. My question was, what is the reference hardware for 0.110 when it comes out later this year? I don't think it's going to be the tablet.
I think it should be, we should find a cheap Chromebook that we can boot as a Fedora sugar system. There are definitely a lot of them out there. We just got to decide on one and go for it.
Yeah.
We know that schools are buying Chromebooks. Chromebooks are outselling Apple hardware these days.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we find a low-end Chromebook that we can get sugar running on. I think that's a pretty good reference statement.
The only catch is you may not be able to get real schools to really unlock their Chromebooks into developer mode.
No,
they want to control. Just as a general thing, yeah.
Yeah, but we're talking about just a reference hardware. Say, look, we know this will work. Now, if you want to do something, you know, then we can talk.
Well, also, I mean, so as I say, the reason I'm raising this topic is that I think that this is a reference hardware, and very specifically, you know, a reference for developers that's easy. So that if you go to the sugarlabs.org website, there's a buy button. You put down your $200, and you get a laptop with sugar on it, and you know you can play around with it. And there's like a buyback scheme. So if you decide that actually you don't want it, you can send it back, and you know for that cycle, you know, we'll take the money. They'll take the machine back. You know, refund you the cost. That kind of thing. You know, the idea of having a reference hardware is having a really easy way to get excited about sugar,
right.
You know, to get a machine running on, be able to give it to your kid or you know your niece or your nephew or whatever, yeah,
but I love that idea, but I think that there's a lesser idea that maybe is a little bit more doable for us in the short term.
Yeah.
And the lesser idea is to say, here's a link to you know 3 different vendors you can buy this hardware from, and here's you know very clear instructions how to get sugar on that machine.
Yeah.
Because you know, for example, you know, Tony and I have been trying to get a laptop to Samsung in Nigeria, and we bought a reasonable machine, and it's going to cost me $700 to ship it.
Uh-huh.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, literally $730 something to ship a $250 machine. And then I tried to, you know, just order directly from over $500 for a $250 machine. So I don't know how it just gets complicated, and I think we want to avoid that complexity in the short term. Let's just do one tranche where we're just saying, here's the reference machine, here are a few places where you can buy it, and this is what you need to do. Because we're talking developers here anyway, so presumably most developers can you know, follow instructions of that sort.
Is there any current Intel classmate platform, or did they stop that effort?
I think they're still doing it. I just don't know.
The latest news article I can find was last released by 2014, because there are occasionally vendors in the U.S. and stuff that will resell a version of them.
Yeah, I remember asking on the list. I'm pretty sure it was the IAP list about this, and I think maybe Seb said that there are local national manufacturers that are still building machines to the classmate spec.
I think the Portuguese guys are still building them.
Lenovo also built one, I thought, and stuff.
But anyway, I think if we just decide on, you know, a machine that you know the core development team vets to make sure it really works, then we just go from there.
Yeah. So it sounds like the that $4,000 pallet of XO1s is not worth pursuing unless it's a donation.
I really think that it's just a lot more work than you imagine. I think Sam sort of did this for a living for 4 or 5 years for OLPC, and it was just a nightmare.
Well, I think it has maybe merit in terms of that is a heck of a potentially deal if it was donated and you could give it to the various groups and you could siphon off a few if you needed them for development. But if you're not already in the process of maintaining XOs, I don't think it's necessarily a good time to start getting in the process of doing so. Because even maintaining the small collection I have of just reference SKUs, praying someone's going to eventually announce a build up front I can test, which hasn't happened yet. Just going through those periodically, checking them, even though they're all in good condition. I imagine this is probably, it's just we don't know the exact condition of those. If they're in great condition, it may be a great deal, but on the other hand, if you have to go through opening the serial, opening 10, 20 minutes, opening each one to reset the internal RTC because they hit the bad clock bug, when their battery went out, it could be an extreme pain. Mm-hmm. And with that, until we have them, we don't necessarily know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so I just think I think is nice an idea as it is. I think our efforts are better put towards this reference machine that has actually got a future. You know, and maybe it makes sense. Maybe we buy some small number of those machines that we can sell on the website for people who don't want to go to the trouble of buying their own. You know, if they live somewhere, we can ship them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think that sounds fine. I think that it's possible. You know, that we could even get some Chromebooks donated from Google. You know, if we can show that we've done a small batch. You know, we've had this success. We've got these new developers. That kind of thing. I could see that working, especially since we could take like last year's Chromebook model.
Right. Or 2 years ago.
Right.
And as long as it's a machine we can unlock, I think Chromebooks are modern enough in terms of their architecture that we can run on the oldest Chromebook.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that sounds good. I don't know where. Let me check my email to see if Sean's emailed me.
There's some merit to those PCs, just because. But beyond that, as I said, because we don't have I Love My XO, or unless you can convince OLPC to let us do a purchase order. But beyond that, no.
Well, I reached out to Mary Jo a couple of weeks ago, and I still haven't heard back from her at the Zamora Foundation.
Mm-hmm. I didn't see anything from Sean. I don't know where he is.
Well, let's see how things go in Chile and in. I mean, there's still a lot of interest in sugar in South America, at least, because I was yesterday on the phone with Paraguayans. They want to do a sugar camp in October down in Asunción. They explicitly asked me to come to Santiago to talk about sugar this week. So, I mean, that's so let's see where things go. We might maybe they've got a platform they want us to use as a reference platform. I'll ask around this week.
Yeah. All right. Well, and thank you, Walter, for making the call at the airport. That's great. Yeah, I guess I think that kind of settles it for me that we shouldn't be testing for the XO1, and yeah, we should just basically sort of forget about it going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that there's, most things will still run on the XO1.
Yeah.
And we don't, I don't think we want to go out of our way to obsolete it, but I don't think I think we need to be looking at new platforms if we're going to grow.
Right. And so I guess OLPC is employing James Cameron, and they have these big users of hundreds of thousands of people using XO1s and up to XO4s around on Fedora 18. So it's sort of up to them to backport things.
Yeah, or at least for them to communicate with us about what their needs are, which they seem to be loath to do.
Right.
Well, anyway, thank you, United Airlines, for being an hour late in the departure so I could join the call.
Nice. All right. Well, have a safe flight.
Thank you.
Eli, Sam, do you guys have any other comments?
I mean, I have an XO1, so it's a little frustrating. They're still out there, and I think that like for years to come, people are going to be finding old XO1s at garage sales and like at wherever, and they're going to look to see like, oh, how can I like put software on this, and how can I update it, and how can I use it? And it is sad that it's not supported. I understand that like the web browser is the big problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have anything to add, but it's
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that like I say, I think that for OLPC to continue maintaining the Fedora 18 OLPC OS, they're going to continue doing that, and they're just going to have to deal with kind of Sugar moving forwards. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm somewhat skeptical about how many people using Sugar outside of XO users.
Well, we do know that in terms of Sugar spin downloads in Fedora as of last August, it was just barely measurable to be isolated on its own in a chart about at 1% of all Fedora downloads.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the XO1, I think it's a really beautiful piece of hardware. Like I kind of like will like put it on display in my house because it looks nice.
Yeah.
And I'll see people using them every once in a while, and it's part of design history, and I think maybe a couple years from now, like people are really going to start to like get some nostalgia for them.
Well, I think there's still possibilities with it. I mean, one thing I have considered is doing a CentOS port, because the CentOS 7 now has, if it's stable enough, an x86 spin, which is being regularly updated alongside the mainline builds. So that could be potentially a port, or at some level, or maybe that should be roughly equivalent to Fedora 19. So it would give a bit more life into it. But as far as well, I guess at some point I believe Dave's planning to talk to OLPC, because I do think it's not clear what their long-term goals are, or if they have moved on to newer versions of EXO Learning or something, because they're having as much problem, I think, with Sugar and trumpeting their successes, and they're being run by the Zamora Tehran Foundation, which is primarily, I believe, responsible for the Nicaraguan deployment.
Yeah.
So it's whatever the Nicaraguan deployment decides to do next, to an extent, controls what OLPC will do.
Yeah.
The other thing is I don't think there is any formal system at OLPC now, because I think Adam Holt told help at laptop.org system has been kind of, with the ticketing and everything, has been shut down, or has been for a while now, not a year or so. So there's no more like informal volunteer support for EXOs. Just large. If EXOs on eBay were going to make a big difference, I would have expected to have seen that more on the mailing list, or perhaps it's again. I think part of the vision is we need to figure out promotional stuff with Sean and others, because we don't. If Sugar, we have to justify to an extent, I think, why should you be using a environment developed around like 2005 and 2016, which is only black and white plus a single accent color.
Uh-huh.
I mean, why is it so pedagogically superior? And it said that may be something else you can ask OLPCs if they can give you copies of any formal studies where they prove that their approach to construction of them actually can be used alongside an actual classroom, which is, I guess I have to do that email on Sugar on the Enterprise, as I call it anyway, but basically Sugar has to fit in if you want Sugar to be used at least in larger districts or just small schools subject to curriculums given to them nationally or wherever.
Yeah.
We have to be able to explain how Sugar fits in those curriculums, and not necessarily, because as originally designed, as I believe, I think Sugar and the EXO platform is very self-centered. You have these school servers, DHCP, Internet Gateway, and everything.
Sorry, say that again.
I had someone's dog barking, but you have Sugar with its Sugar school server was DHCP, Internet Gateway, everything. So basically, Sugar, as originally conceived, arguably, at least in some people's views, including, I believe, Bradley Kuhn's, Sugar, the EXOs was, everyone was going to embrace their platform, even though the EXO potentially has a non-standard power supply connector for anti-theft. It also has the non-standard battery cell size, which is now really hurting us. And you have a lot of other kind of issues with it was designed presuming everyone was going to flock to Sugar, basically, and the EXO has the platform to go to, and that never happened. Instead, we were kind of stuck in the limitations of the EXO, and that really, I don't know to what extent I can go into, that really showed in bids and stuff, where the classmate kept winning because it had the larger hard drive, even if it wasn't low power and stuff, so that's since kind of obsoleted by SSDs. You had the CPU that could show full graphics video, and if someone tested that was a big problem even with like the Miami deployment, is all your web browser, granted, well, let's ignore the fact web browsers in 256 megabytes nowadays is kind of silly. They'll eat that in like 5 seconds, but if you look at all the stuff in web browsers, if a school is paying for like an online curriculum, it historically used Flash, it historically used Macromedia, Shockwave, which isn't even available on Linux.
Yeah.
And a lot of those details are things which if you're going to integrate into school curriculum, the Sugar's browse has probably never been certified on for anyone's online system, and especially in the Miami deployment, I believe the Miami-Dade schools had at least like 20 or so web apps they were using, and I don't know how many of them were not reachable via XOs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's also some of the stuff we can probably fix, which historically isn't there. If we could ever get stuff fixed, like Sugar is designed about in a high DPI environment of that pixel chi display.
Yeah, yeah.
Nowadays, now you're finally getting high DPI support into Linux.
Uh-huh.
But I think about a good deal of the vision needs to be, how are we integrating with everything? How do we market this? I don't necessarily see it as we're going to support XYZ platform, although having a reference is good to know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, to be honest with you, about just having activities packaged, and maybe having like a Sugar Shell packaged as a app itself, and so activities can either be launched from within that shell, or they can just be launched as standalone regular programs.
There are a few Sugar activities I believe can tolerate just being launched straight as from Python. I think Turtle are one of the Turtle blocks, or Turtle may be one of them. Where there's no centralized, if not active, Sugar Shell session running launch in standalone mode, and when you exit app prompt to save to file.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's something I have pondered before.
Yeah.
Also, in a lot of schools, like the very expensive schools, would have like remote access solutions. With this obvious disclaimer, my employer works on one that even works on Linux, so you could potentially just have a Linux box in the back room, just running Sugar for a whole bunch of people.
Oh right, so LPC had like a what was it called? Those systems.
Well, they had a system online for a bit with like VNC web access to Sugar, but someone was testing that out.
For like thin clients, I forget what it's called. There's like some big.
Are you thinking about I forget the name of the project, but yes, there are thin client projects for Linux as well. But one I know I should know because it was based out of Ohio, and I was at one of the conferences it was mentioned at. But that's so you could get thin client support. As I said, school server, there seems to be a lot of people working on the school server, but they're adding a lot of functionality which isn't necessarily just dependent on Sugar.
Isn't it the LTSP, the Linux Terminal Server project?
Yes, that is it.
Yeah.
So, and I said my company has their fancy remoting solutions for Linux as well that can go up to 3D graphics. But it would be, in my case, it's not your Pixie booting things like LTSP is. You just actually install clients like a VNC client all on your actual machines, and we have support for pretty much anything. So any Chrome, so you could have the Linux thing in the back end, and you could have Chrome clients, Windows clients, other Linux clients, or even Android or whatever, and they'd all just point to this back end Sugar server running Linux. It's something I've debated actually setting up, but I tried to keep Linux and work and Sugar isolated from each other until I'd have to formally go for clearance for that to get approval before trying something like that, because they don't want things accidentally tangled.
Yeah. Okay. So that will make sense.
We also have do we want to consider Sugarizer and the web stuff as the way forward, maybe? Do we want? I don't know how well that's really been tested on browsers like Internet Explorer and stuff.
Yeah. 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 I see. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like that there's like a million kids using these XOs, and they're you know they're just going to have to throw them away, basically, aren't
Depends how much support, how much time and effort we're willing to put into trying to support it. It's admittedly a bit of a problem because you do. I don't know. Is there any merit in like talking like Adam Holt and his Haiti deployment, and as I said, I brought up the Columbus School for Girls and their various deployments in the Caribbean, and seeing if there's a way forward in terms of, do we try to migrate everyone over to one particular thing at once, or otherwise, if you don't, I just feel, granted, OLPC avoids setting an end of support date, and others may avoid sending an end of, and it's like they don't want to admit, they don't want to not be associated with the past, but I feel if we don't say we're going to stop supporting this, they're going to expect to be supported basically forever until they suddenly aren't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to be honest with you, it sounds like, you know, my sort of interpretation of what was said is that Sugar 1.08 will be the last one that will work on an XA1, unless OLPC does something to backport its dependencies.
I don't think it's impossible backport still, but eventually maybe it's what you backport and what you forward port.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, yeah.
I don't know if you have a chat or anything. Is anyone else commenting or watching?
Let me check it. I don't think so. It's just been us three who joined the call, as far as I can tell. Let me check their page. No, just Bernie and Laura said that they couldn't make it. And yeah, it's been with Sean. Well, I think yeah. I don't know. Eli, any other thoughts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. Like, I wonder, has anyone ever talked about like if this whole sugar project were to be restarted today? Like, what are the mistakes that wouldn't be repeated? Like maybe it's kind of a dumb question because. Like it seems to me like nobody really knows where this project's going.
Huh?
And I wonder if the whole thing could just be restarted today, like what that would look like.
Huh?
I mean, so we're going to start throwing laptops from helicopters with new software on them.
Well, so basically, from what I can tell, there's only 5 sort of organisations left. Adam Holt's Unleash Kids thing seems to be totally over. No one seems to be doing that anymore. There's a few people who respond on the mailing list occasionally, but there's like nobody's left. There's OLPC Canada, and I haven't really followed up with people in Canada yet. I haven't managed to speak to anyone in Canada about it. But that also seems to have run pretty dry. I mean, I think that there's still some stuff going. There's been some stuff going in the last 12 months I've seen online, but it doesn't seem very active. Then there's OLPC France, and Lionel, who's the guy who started Sugarizer, is there. And there's a few other people in Paris who, continue to be involved, and they're interested in continuing to be involved, but they're not really being proactive. And then there's the OLPC SF community, which tends to draw about 12 people to their monthly meeting. But again, I don't know what they've actually produced or accomplished. They do host an annual summit for the last few years in San Francisco, which is quite cool. Seems to draw maybe 30 people. Although many of the presentations were not done in person, they were just all done over Google Hangout. And then obviously, yeah, there's Sugar Labs itself. There's OLPC. OLPC, from what I can tell, is paying James to do maintenance work for XOs because they have existing users. But they released the XO4 a few years ago, and I don't know. It seems an XO5 is unlikely to come from them.
Oh, they kind of did release something if you watched carefully. I believe it was potentially, as best as I've indirectly heard, but I can't confirm, but it was a classmate running Ubuntu. The LTS, the Ubuntu directories in there that you find hidden on devlaptop.org with the repository there. So that is kind of covered in their bug tracker.
Classmate?
What?
What hardware was it?
I believe it was probably a classmate. They were looking into UEFI and doing anti-theft boot and stuff on it.
Uh-huh.
So that, and I think I sent you at one point the link saying that they weren't going to do the 32-bit binaries on their own unless someone was to pay them to do it.
32-bit binaries of what?
Of their Ubuntu repository, which was all 64-bit.
Uh-huh.
So
and was that running Sugar, that classmate?
Yes, it was. That was a lot of the porting work was to get Ubuntu, I think, it onto that version. I think it was a 1404 LTS Ubuntu they were working on.
So that was in 2014?
That would have been a while back, yeah. Probably 2013, 2014.
Right. And
they also had an Android they made for XO4 that they did a few public releases of and stopped.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if that's still being used by anyone.
That was because the Australians wanted it, right?
I wouldn't know offhand who, or at least I don't recall who wanted it.
Okay. Well, so the final organisation is OLPC Australia, and they actually are like serious, where they've continued. They got fed up with Sugar, they got fed up with OLPC, and they've rebranded as One Education, so they're not associated with this community anymore. And they have substantial funding from the Australian National Science Foundation. They have funding from Microsoft and Google, and they have a sort of new tablet/laptop 2-in-1 device that is x86 64-bit, and it's not running Sugar, but their device.
I thought they abandoned their hardware project, at least the Infinity project. I thought they abandoned, or someone thought they did, because they canceled.
The Kickstarter. They had this modular PC idea that they presented at the Sugar Summit in San Francisco. But there was a Kickstarter for it, and it seems like, that's maybe not going to go ahead. But basically, their device maybe could be a reference device for Sugar, but they said
I thought they stopped though potentially because they decided working in hardware was super expensive, and it was by the time you built the things, there wasn't enough interest, so they would have been at a loss. So it would have just been easier for them to pick someone's existing thing, do some minor customizations, and have it shipped from China.
Yeah. Right. I think that they are they're sort of friendly, but they're not being proactive. So if there was demand, if a school somewhere said, "Oh yeah, we want the One Education tablet PC, and we want Sugar on it," maybe they would do the work to have it pre-installed. But they're just not seeing that demand.
How many people really know what Sugar is compared to Scratch, even, or eToys? There was a whole few groups that said such. Columbus School for Girls is one. You had, I forget, Wave Place was another. Don't know their current status, where they just use the Exos to run eToys.
Yeah. So I know about Wave Place. What was the other place you mentioned?
It's copied them on It's Columbus School for Girls does as a annual summer project where they go out, maintain exos out of their place, and they
What is
go
it?
annually to
Where?
what?
School for Girls. Where is it?
It's in Columbus, Ohio. I actually visited them once. They basically run. They're probably on the order maybe of like Adam's old Unleashed Kids thing. At one, if you're saying is may not be active anymore, where they have maybe a few schools they support and bring them laptops that they've refurbished that people have donated.
Yeah. It sounds about the same as the Kids on Computers group. You know them?
Kids in Computers.
Kidsoncomputers.org.
I don't know that offhand.
Okay, so basically this is it came out of Scale, the South California, free software.
Linux Expo.
They, were just some people there, and they said, there's all these corporate PCs that get refurbished. Maybe we could organize them to be donated and then given to schools in developing countries. And they got like shipping sponsorship from FedEx. They got donated PCs. They raised a bunch of volunteers to go to places in Mexico, Philippines, and so on. And I think they have around 20 schools or local labs they've set up. And it's a nice project. It's very it's a very friendly project. It's a small community, but people are very dedicated and active. And there's no negativity. There's no bickering. It's very professional friendly. It's very nice.
Mm-hmm. I think Sugar needs to organize with a lot of these groups just to get it and see have at least as an option, like all PCs to have dual boot modes into GNOME and Sugar. The catch is that is another work area because if you dual boot GNOME and Sugar, it's going to change your cursor in GNOME to the Sugar huge cursor, and there's no way in GNOME right now. Yeah. In their infinite wisdom, they change the cursor back without using a tweak tool.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we seem to be meandering a bit. I don't know quite what we're trying to get for the vision out of this meeting, even if though there's only been like 5 of us involved so far, including Walter.
There's only 4. There was me.
4 of us.
I don't know. I mean, I think the other thing you mentioned was Wave Place. So I spoke to the Wave Place guy, whose name I forgot, Tim Falconer. And so Tim is here on the east coast of the US, northeast coast, and Wave Place was his sort of edutech company, and he now has a proprietary sort of eToys-like system that's written in Java, and it's like a massively multiplayer online storytelling environment.
I think I recall seeing that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's proprietary, sadly. The guy tried to raise some money on Kickstarter to fund it. He has some users, but the Kickstarter didn't work out, and so it's a hobby project for him, and it's proprietary. So I'm not, not that interested. It's cool.
So apart from maybe querying a few groups, the number of actual known Sugar using kids at the moment could be less than 1,000.
Sorry, say that again?
So at least in terms of if maybe OLPC went off and did their own thing, so we don't necessarily know what Nicaragua was up to. Excluding like maybe Nicaragua or Uruguay, outside of those groups, presuming they may or may not be using Sugar, the number of known groups using sugar may have less than 1,000 kids if it's just little things like Columbus School for Girls. Actually, I don't know if they even use sugar, if they just use eToys.
Uh-huh.
Or Adam or Unleashed Kids, though you said that stopped with their little schools of like maybe 40 or so kids. So it could be less. The number of we have no idea because a lot of these groups are largely offline or hidden behind school servers or something.
Uh-huh.
I think that may be a worthy question of the list, is to just get them to enumerate every group that's still using sugar.
Yeah.
That they're aware of, and get a count of the number of kids using it, because that's one of the, dare I say, that's one of the things OLPC was paranoid about, is they did not want the usage, even when they did have wins, to be known, because they were afraid then Microsoft or someone would come in and swoop their win away.
Uh-huh. Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that the most successful sort of free software remix culture edutech project is Scratch.
Yeah. And Scratch kind of integrates with Sugar barely, so or at least has a concept as a journal. If it sees a journal, it knows how to handle it.
Uh-huh.
At least in the binary versions, I don't know about since they went to Flash, didn't they? Or maybe they're even HTML5 now.
So Squeak 1 ran on the Scratch 1 ran on the Squeak VM. So it's essentially an eToys sort of custom build. And then they Scratch 2 runs on the Adobe Flash VM. And now Google has just announced at Google I/O a few weeks ago with the Scratch project that they have an HTML5 player that uses a sort of JavaScript-based VM system to execute it.
Dare I say, at this point, it almost sounds like the most success Sugar is having is as being a summer of code project.
Yeah.
We don't have any other promotions really going on, or any idea of what's going on with the organization to an extent.
Yeah.
Because if I had to justify why should you use Sugar, I don't have a good justification, even though I worked for OLPC for roughly 3 years.
Right.
I mean, it's a very good learning environment for what it was designed for, which is the semi-isolated group who doesn't necessarily have language schools, where everything can be done in an iconic environment for the most part.
Yeah.
But in the other problem I should note is, well, it goes back to your XO1 thing, kind of, sort of. People are something else I've noticed in the time I worked with OLPC is schools aren't necessarily interested in being told, here, have your customized low-power, sunlight-readable XO1. They want what everyone else is having. They want what the first world people have. And Sugar on its own is a bit more of a, even though it's GTK-based, is a bit more of a development thing of its own versus why not write a more general GTK app? Why not write an Android app? Android developers are a dime a dozen. Okay, someone who maybe can do Linux is GTK is a lot easy. You just do a GNOME app is a lot easier than getting someone who's going to take the time to just specialize and do Sugar work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's been ever better front on making those apps first class citizens within Sugar when it is running as the window manager. Well, Metacity is technically the window manager.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting that you say that because the sort of justification, or not justification, but the explanation that I heard, from Walter and maybe Bernie, he told me this, maybe Adam, um, was that it was made instead of using eToys, is um, Python is like more widely known than small talk, and that sort of going back to Eli's question, that if we were starting this effort today, then I think we would almost certainly have it either as a web thing in JavaScript or as an Android thing in Java.
But that is just to a more fun one. Does the kid have a view source button, which was a big thing with the XO1.
Sorry, wait, does what have an XO? Does it have view source?
Well, there's actually a key combination on XOs that is treated to view source, and a sugar application, if it sees that or the equivalent, will show you its source code. I think the idea was all kids are suddenly going to become programmers, and that's not necessarily true. The idea is also you can copy the application. Ideally, there's even that functionality. You could ask Sugar, and I think maybe they'd list you to copy the application, and then you can go. The idea being then you would go in and edit the copy of the application that you've just cloned.
A big flaw in my mind is the fact that you can't really develop applications on the XO itself. I mean, that's always seemed like kind of a huge problem with the platform.
Have you seen Pippy?
No, what is that?
So Pippy, Pippy, is the sort of
Python editor.
Sorry?
Yeah, but it's not really. That's just a simple program editor. It's not something like Eclipse or Visual Studio or anything along that caliber where you could step through a program and debug.
Yeah, I mean, I saw in the archives that developed activity, but it never really went anywhere. Whereas Pippy was quick, easy, done.
I'll have to check that out.
Your dog's barking.
Yeah, my dog's freaking out. I'm gonna go, guys.
Okay, man.
Alright.
I didn't have more to add. Okay, bye. No, it's okay.
Well, also thank you, Sam, for joining us.
Alright.
And yeah, thanks for your ideas. I mean, how do you feel about the direction that we're?
Not quite sure. I think we need to develop some sort of future platform, but I think really at this point we're not even on the advertising. We're on more, if we were trying to reinvent the project, market research.
Right.
I was like ready to come back, but it's so weird.
I don't know.
Hello?
Hello.
How are you?
Hi.
So speaking of market research.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I think maybe we mixed up the time, Sean. I'm sorry. I've been chatting to Sam and Walter and Eli, but they've had to go.
I'm sorry. I can barely understand you.
Is this better?
Yeah, for the moment.
Yeah, I'm sorry if we messed up the times. I thought we were meeting about an hour ago.
Ah.
Oh, you said that approximately 6 hours, and it was accurate then. So
Well, yeah. So you've been on the wire for a while?
Yeah,
uh,
Walter was able to join about an hour ago, and Eli has just left.
Ah. And was Samir on the call?
No.
No.
you don't know how much.
I've taken some minutes, so let me just try and get that into that Titan pad that Laura set up. It was disconnected for me. Let me try and reconnect.
Okay.
All right. All right, I've put them in the pad. It's titanpad.com/cap S LV and then lowercase ISION.
Okay, I didn't get any of that. Maybe you could put that in an email or in a message or somewhere I could click on it or copy it.
I put it in the Hangout page.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm looking at it.
There's no document there, but
Okay.
No, you put that away. Oh, put that away. You won't care.
Okay. Okay, I see a lot of like architecture discussions.
you say, do we really want the vision to be? That's a very wordy vision, or maybe I'm thinking more of a mission statement.
Right.
I would have more just said sugar is just the. I'm only on a phone here. I can't do much in my work computers going out. Sorry, people. But it's just the function of sugar is. I would just say sugar is the weight is to. We're going to Sugar Labs is going to just basically build the constructionist learning environment meant for younger children or something like that. I wouldn't necessarily go into. I don't know if I really. That's one of those other interesting academic whatever disconnects. Do we really want to, in the vision, insist on free laboring and open source? That was one of those other major disconnects between the corporation side of OLPC and the academic side. Is it necessary for Sugar to be an environment where everybody can edit and see the source code?
Well, historically, that's been Walter's point of view. You know, a completely open system. And I think where that bumped up to a problem in OLPC was the NDAs for some chip architecture stuff. I think Kanta had insisted that there be some NDAs signed, that some proprietary stuff would never be exposed. But from a marketing standpoint, we've always used that as a differentiator. We've always said, the view source is a key way for learners to learn more about the system that they're using. Low floor, no ceiling. That's been the tradition.
It's probably more of an issue for OLPC because they were doing all the development of Sugar, and then someone else could go off and use it for free, and I think that just annoyed several people.
Well,
So they.
I mean, that was a long time ago already.
Mhm. So basically, within Sugar Lab, there's no issues with people copying us. Ideally, we could be like Gnome or someone, and they'd all be helping us. But from an OLPC perspective, the concept is if I contribute upstream, then everyone else gets it as a copy. But I think some of the stuff that came up was like, does there need to be a platform? But in general, I think even first is what is the current state of things? What be the market research? What is everyone using to kind of define where we should be going? Because Eli was raising the point of if we restarted the project today, what would it look like?
Right. Well, that's a good exercise. But I mean, there's no budget for market research, so that that reduces that right out of the gate. I mean, I suppose if a budget was made available for market research, we could do some, but
or even just survey what we have, people currently using it, why are they currently using sugar. We don't even necessarily know outside of like big deployments like Uruguay and Nicaragua, presuming they tell us that how many people are still using them, if there are any significant number of sugar using students.
Well, yeah. Historically, OLPC didn't want to share the contacts that they had. The client information. They didn't want to share that historically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been a disconnect between Sugar the development and Sugar the deployments since always.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think so the majority of the discussion that we had, with Walter, was around this question about the XO1, because it seems that at the moment it's quite messy, where James Cameron is releasing the OLPC OS, for the XO1, which is a Fedora 18 base, and he's including the latest version of Sugar in that, although it doesn't have the latest versions of GTK. For me, the question is, for my Google Summer of Code project, what should we be testing for? And Walter sort of suggested that we should be testing for the latest stuff. We should be building for Fedora 24, for Ubuntu 16.04, and if it doesn't work for older users, then that's tough for them.
Because I mean, it's true that the XO1 is getting long in the tooth at this point.
Uh-huh.
It is true that the XO1 is an old machine at this point.
Yeah.
It's like writing the Timex, well, it's not quite writing the Timex Sinclair or ZX81 with 2 kilobytes of RAM, but it's compared to a modern processor with gigabytes of RAM built in.
Yeah.
Your web browser could use up all the RAM on an XO1 easily. In fact, I think mine probably currently is. Oh, not quite, only 200.
Well, I certainly agree that it's a question that should be resolved. The XO1 support. It's definitely a question that needs to be resolved. When is the end date? I mean, I think Dave, you said on the list that for you 2020 would be a good end date. Is that right?
Well, so I don't have a very strong opinion about this. I'm developing this font editor with this Google Summer of Code student. Time's ticking away. We need a decision about this because this guy, needs to know what he's writing. And we would like to use features that are in the latest GTK. And if we're going to support the XO, that sounds fine. We can do it. But I want clarity on this. And so
Well,
the answer is
to some extent, you may have to talk.
over today. I'm happy with that as well.
Well, to some extent, you may have to talk to James to see what his plans are, because all I see lately with releases from the outside is, oh, here's your release. There isn't even necessarily a, here's a, please test this release anymore. I don't know. There used to be a team in New Zealand that tested all this stuff. I don't know whatever happened to that group. But it's just, oh, here it is, go use it, to the extent that it includes the open source versions of the drivers.
Well, I mean, Eli and I have XO1s that we just picked up on eBay. So, you know, as this palette thread, you know, getting hold of XO1s for little groups is fine, and there seem to be hundreds of thousands of kids using them.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably Adam who has the most visibility on that. With Unleash Kids, and he also worked on what he called the OLPC map, which is, you know, the drill down map with details on each deployment. You've seen that?
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, when I have questions about that kind of thing, I go to Adam and I talk to him.
Right. But yeah, I mean, the problem seems to be that, sort of as Sam was saying, because OLPC didn't upstream stuff, then the XO is kind of stuck on this old version of the kernel. You know, that's its private fork, and you know, this means we're stuck on Fedora 18 and old UTK versions. And yeah, I mean, I just think, you know, that if we're going to say we're going to support the XO1, maybe we should be, you know, moving away from Fedora, you know, to like Puppy Linux or something, you know, that's known to work on very low-powered PCs.
Well, for a little bit of historical perspective, you had some people at OLPC that really wanted to get rid of Fedora as soon as they could, and this was problematic because at the time, and I'm talking like 2010, 2011, some of the biggest contributors you had to Sugar Labs code and, you know, packaging and so forth, sugar on a stick, were from Fedora people. So that was just really problematic.
Well, I mean, if they, you know, if I mean, the kernel can be updated, right? The fact is an old kernel runs the hardware, and the changes needed can be put upstream.
It's not so much at least with XO1 and 1.5. It's more it hasn't been tested with newer kernels, and that so things broke, and newer user lands. That's where the breakage is. So it's potentially, at least on those two, it's potentially correctable breakage. It's just the 2020 date in that sense comes from the sense that the mainstream Linux distributions which support x86 processors all are stopping that support around 2020.
Yeah. Right.
And even on the ARM ones, part of OLPC's problem with the 1.7.5 and 4 is that they jumped onto the ARM bandwagon before anyone else really did. So they had to do all the driver work and stuff. The other thing is OLPC did not pay any of the patent stuff. So MP3 playing and stuff is never, it's like Fedora, won't be supported, at least officially, except possibly on XO4, where at least for a majority of the units, the royalties have been paid. They just don't release the, or at one point in time, at least the majority of the units had the royalties paid already for all your video codecs. They just don't release the binary drivers to everybody for them for some reason.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't quite understand that.
I remember there was a while when, like every month, somebody would appear on the list asking when there would be Flash support, and the answer was always never. And or somebody would helpfully say, well, here are the 23 steps you could do to add Flash to an X01, but it will slow it down so much it won't be usable.
But in some cases, that in some sense you can say that with the XO4 and 175, the ARM stuff, there are now upstreamed, as John nonetheless noticed, there's now alternative video drivers and stuff. The catch is getting that all mapped to the open firmware environment and device tree of an XO is going to take work. And at this point, is it necessarily worth getting I don't know if it's. I'm not qualified to say how much time it's going to take a kernel developer to do the work. So there are potential ways you could do it. It's just, is the effort worth it? Just like we're debating with this palette of 4,000 XOs.
Right.
Well, yeah. So it seems that Walter says that it's not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not. In my view, as I said, it's not if you're not already doing this work for a living. So if the deployment's interested in the XOs, if we could get it to them, that's great, because that's a huge stock of stuff. But beyond that, I wouldn't necessarily be looking to store 100 XOs in my house.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think the question is, how do we market sugar? I think we kind of have to look at what we have as how do we market sugar, and how do we expand its market to the extent that we have the knowledge on a limited budget to do.
Well, I've been, mystified for the past 2 or 3 years how to market sugar, because I developed a strategy that had been initially very successful in 2009, 2010. And what happened was a crisis developed where there was pushback from some of the developers who were not comfortable because some of the tasks that needed to be done, they felt that marketing was assigning tasks to them, and they were like, that will never happen, and you can't give us orders. And I was like, well, it's not a question of giving out orders; it's a question of to create a package that's usable for a teacher in a classroom. We need building blocks, and one of the blocks that we need is a very easy installer, for example. And certain blocks that we absolutely had to have, there was just nobody to code them. And for as long as sugar is not pre-installed on a machine, there's a real barrier. I used to talk all the time about two difficult barriers in marketing sugar and in spreading sugar, and the first one is the installation barrier. And installation could be as simple or as difficult as you imagine, because there are 4 different ways of doing it. But we tried to simplify that with sugar on a stick by saying, well, sugar on a stick does not touch your host computer, and you carry it in your pocket and you plug it in and it will work. And it was actually fairly reliable. And then the other approach was the unfamiliarity barrier, because kids do just fine with sugar, but adults have a terrible time. And one of the things that OLPC did not do back in the day was brief journalists on how sugar is used. And in the end, journalists would just say, well, it runs Linux. That would be like all they would say. They would say it runs Linux, and they wouldn't say anything else, because they had nothing to go on, with the software. And I mean, that would be as simple as a video that explains the first steps on how you navigate in sugar, for example. Uh, but these were the main two barriers to deal with. But as I say, aside from having sugar on a machine, it's quite difficult to have it installed and for people to be able to use it and to be able to support it with what we have. It's quite difficult. Like sugar on a stick, for example. It was 3 or 4 people, and what they wanted to do was kind of code and put it out, but understandably, nobody wanted to do frontline support for it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, understandably, because there would be tens of thousands of downloads of it, and nobody wanted to be in the loop where they had to respond. And so we would have the situation where you would have a teacher in a random classroom who would write in and saying, well, I'm trying to use it with my students, but it gets stuck, here at such and such point. What do I do? And Peter Robinson would do his best, but just like everybody else, he had a day job, and he was also doing lots of coding. He hit the limit almost immediately as to what he could do in terms of support.
Yeah.
So, it's a very difficult nut to crack, because I mean, if sugar was very easy to install and was bulletproof and would never crash, then we wouldn't have such a problem. But it's difficult to deploy and install.
Uh-huh.
I could also say that in 2009, 2010, I was able to invest quite a bit of funds. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot, but about $5,000 of my own money in making the marketing happening, and it was quite successful in the beginning. We had the BBC coverage. We had we would do a press release. It would be carried by 40 news outlets, but that was not enough. We needed more pieces, and among the pieces that we needed were, an easy installer, bulletproof software that would not crash, that would be very reliable, lesson plans, a support desk, all the kinds of things that you would need for a solution. Comparable projects such as Moodle were able to thrive because their community was so large that there would generally always be somebody hanging out on the ERC channel to be able to provide support.
Yeah.
But the Sugar Labs community historically has been smaller. It's been more difficult.
Uh-huh.
Walter, on several occasions, was in talks with other hardware suppliers about sugar being pre-installed, and unfortunately, those fizzled.
Uh-huh.
Generally speaking, Walter, of course, knows the details better than I do, but generally speaking, the hardware manufacturers were interested in sugar because it was free.
Uh-huh.
But they were reticent because sugar was not outside of OLPC. It was not a well-known education technology. You could say that. And so for instance, I did a few education tech shows, maintaining a stand about sugar, and I had a little collection of netbooks at the time. This is going back maybe 4 or 5 years, and for instance, I had a little Dell. I would walk over to the Dell stand, and I would show. They would have a fake classroom with 25 Dell education laptops in a classroom, and I would take out my personal one, and I would boot it up with sugar on a stick on it, and I would show it to them, and their eyes would pop. And I said to them, you guys could also be adding this to your offer. And, generally they were interested in finding out that it was free, but they would say, well, our point of view is that it's an exotic interface. It's not Windows. It's not even, a mainstream distro. Like I think at the time they were selling a SUSE.
Mm-hmm.
That you had your choice between, Windows whatever and SUSE.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a little bit of backstory. So after Sugar on a Stick filled the main developer quit the project, and I mean there were also when we were having very successful press coverage, there was also some internal pressure. There was a member of the community who was trying to gain more control over the trademarks, for example.
Uh-huh.
I think that was a third party, not even related to us, trying to do that. Or
yes.
There was.
Yeah, that was another thing. Although Walter and I, together with the SFC, we were able to convince them to give it up.
Right.
But yeah, what was I going to say?
Activity Central?
Sorry?
You mean Activities Central?
Right. Well, yeah, that was Dave Farning, and Dave was very dynamic. I mean, he always felt that there should be a business approach.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, he would kind of push off in his own direction. Like he felt something, which perhaps is true. He said, well, Sugar Labs should really split into two entities the way Mozilla does. There should be a foundation which owns a corporation. And the corporation should run like a business, and the foundation should be nonprofit and should, manage what the corporation does.
Yeah.
And this seemed like an interesting avenue to explore from my point of view, but there were several members of the community who didn't like that at all, who got very upset at it.
It was kind of like the LPC already had that.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And what were their objections?
Sorry?
What were their objections?
Oh, well, sometimes ideological, Sometimes they'd be like, well, we contribute to this project because it's open source and it's not Microsoft and it's free software and it's not normal that somebody else should be making a profit off of what we're doing. And if you could be reasonable and you could say, well, look, the GPL says that you can make a profit from doing it, and you can build services around free software. It's not incompatible. It's not incompatible, but I mean, I interviewed Richard Stallman twice, and I'm a little bit familiar with the concepts, and it was. I think it could have worked, and another thing, for example, I was pushing for a while and saying, well, let's find some corporate sponsors. For example, I was developing a strategy after Sugar on a Stick fizzled out, and I was saying Oracle has this virtual machine technology, which is VirtualBox, and the license is very interesting because it says free distribution of the runtime for personal use and education use, which means that we could have had I mean, I mentioned it's still possible today, a single bundle that would execute, install VirtualBox, and run a VM and boot up Sugar.
Yeah.
And the there were only two downsides of doing that I identified, and the first one is that, of course, the VM would be huge. It would be like, a gigabyte or something.
Yeah.
And and I mean, there's a solution to that. There's a solution to that, which historically Ubuntu had that problem, and they developed way back in the day, 20 years ago or whatever. They developed the system of just mailing out a CD.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one problem, was the size of what you had to download, and the other problem was hosting. How do you manage the load, and how do you walk people through the installation and so forth? And so I had suggested on the lists that we partner with Oracle, which sponsors VirtualBox. And I said, well, maybe they could host a matrix, and by that I mean a pre-built VMs with Sugar, with bundles of different activities, or perhaps by language. Different approaches like this, and there were some developers who were like, well, no, we will never do that. Oracle is evil, and we shouldn't even talk to them, and so on and so forth. And if several other people had picked up the ball and been willing to go forward, we could have made that happen too. But there was just no interest. There was no interest in going further with that. So since then, I've been stumped. Past 3 years, I've just been stumped. I've done very little around the project. I've been mostly absent. But I really I really try to imagine how something could be jump started. Probably the best way forward is the availability of funds, which all of a sudden makes lots of things possible. So I think that the idea of doing fundraising is a really good idea. And there's just one ingredient that's absolutely vital to do fundraising. It's to have a basic brochure. Whether it's the ideas that are on the website, folded into 3, or a PDF, or something you hand out, but a really basic brochure that gives the basic vision, the mission, and what we plan on doing in the next couple of years. So I mean, that's why that's why it's really important to me that there be a very clear, high-level vision as to where we're going with Sugar. And it could be different things. It could be like, okay, for instance, I had suggested for a couple of years, I was like, well, let's do something with the Raspberry Pi. We were in contact with them, and I was like, we could do branded SD cards. And it's a known platform, and I certainly agree with Tony Anderson when he says it's a ripoff compared to an XO if you have nothing, if you're in a developing country. However, in a developed country where there are keyboards and screens all over the place, it could be a very interesting thing to do. And plus, over 1 million of the first generation Pis were sold too. I mean, that's not a negligible number. So I still have a couple here somewhere. So Lionel Lasquet, who's here in Paris as well, he was also suggesting that we look at the Raspberry Pi, but it's kind of the same thing. A marketing guy like me, or somebody like Lionel can make great suggestions, but somebody still has to do the work, and I'm not able to do that work. And Lionel's response has been to develop Sugarizer, which I think is a great initiative.
Hmm?
All right, so that's some backstory.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you know that uh, yeah, you know, Walter suggested picking a Chromebook model. You know, maybe a model that's a few years old, but you know, it's sort of still easy to get a hold of. That might be a bit, you know, cheaper. And having that as a sort of a reference model, and then you know, having Sugar Labs buy 10 units, and then offering them to sale, you know, for new developers, and see if we can get 10 new developers this year. Um, and basically abandoning the XO and making it OLPC and sort of basically James Cameron's you know, concern that if XO users want to be able to upgrade, then they have to look to OLPC to you know, their latest versions, and if that means that OLPC ends up forking the previous release of Sugar and doing very incremental maintenance on it, and that new activities don't run on that old version, Walter seems to be happy with that.
Yes, because you know there are some deployments that
Mhm.
use very ancient versions of Sugar,
Yeah.
and that's just because it's from a logistics standpoint extremely complicated to patch them and upgrade them.
Uh,
You know, there's you know there are some tricks that have been developed. Like what was that? There was like a script called Nano something or other that could like flash 64 uh,
You
64
know,
exos simultaneously.
you had NAND Blaster, which basically just
Yes.
multicasts everything. However,
Right, right, right.
that's never been ported to the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi card for an XO4, as far as I know.
Ah, okay.
But
Yeah, yeah. So
in general, as the images got larger, that became, in some cases, it became more efficient just to use a whole bunch of USB sticks,
right.
because you have to loop around potentially a few times if you missed a packet the first time. Then you have to wait till it gets back around. It's basically like a repeating 8-track. So it basically goes through all in sequence and broadcasts out each packet in the image and then goes back to the start. And you have to keep listening to it, though there is some forward error correction, until you finally get the message.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so you know, it's just a fact that it's not simple to upgrade large numbers of XOs. You know, when there's not just the system, but there's also the firmware. You know, if there's an old firmware, you know, in some cases you need a more modern firmware to run a more modern version of Sugar, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a handful of people who are ace at knowing how to do it. For small numbers, you know, like Tony Anderson, he's like a walking encyclopedia of how to do that. But there are still deployments where there are probably large stacks of XOs stacked up and running, you know, if they still run extremely old versions of Sugar. So yeah, uh, I've always been frustrated with something, and that is that I've never had decent contacts with OLPC. I've always it's always been complicated for me to talk to OLPC.
yeah.
And you know, with one exception, which was Rodrigo, when Rodrigo came to Paris, and we visited a foundation here, actually a very prominent foundation, and they had started a project, but it unfortunately never finished. But you know, I've always had difficult relations with OLPC, and it's not from lack of trying. So I mean, I don't even know who's running OLPC these days, or how it's being run, or what they're doing. I just have no idea.
We know who technically runs it from the public record. We just don't know what the Zamorans are up to.
Mm.
So and I said we don't know if OLPC on their own is looking at something new. One thing I would bring up with this whole XO whatever abandonment is whenever if you're saying you're terminating something, my current company is guilty of this as well and caused a problem with it, is whenever you abandon a project, you're risking, you better have something good to tell them to go to next.
Right.
Because as soon as you tell them, we are no longer supporting X, if you have no alternative, and even if you do have an alternative, which may be better in some areas and worse in others, that causes them to look out at all alternatives.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you're no longer supporting like Windows. Well, I know that's for example with Windows. Oh, you're not supporting Windows XP anymore. Okay, we're going to suddenly look at Android. We're going to look at Macintosh. We're going to look at Linux, maybe. Yeah, right. But
right.
As soon as you abandon them, they're going to have to go look at. They're not just going to just look at you. They're going to look at everything else, and you have to have something to show, or a vision at least, to say this is where we're going, and proof you can execute on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I would certainly agree that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's in pajamas anymore here, so I'm turning it on.
Is it late for you?
Yeah, it's midnight here.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for making the call in the evening.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to turn in soon. I'm a little tired.
Yeah. All right. Well, no. I mean, it's been great to hear. A bit more of the history of stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think that for me and Eli, we want clarity because Walter invited me and him to do this font editor over the summer, and we want to use features that are in GTK 3.20, and that doesn't run on the XOs. Eli was very excited. The reason he's volunteering is because he had actually picked up an XO1 at a New York recycling center. He'd just seen it like in the lot, and he was like, "Wow, I remember that. That was an amazing thing. It's a beautiful design. It's green. It works in sunlight, and I want to learn more about Python. I can take it to the beach and play on Python at the beach. It's cool." And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that there is some interesting stuff, some value in supporting the XO1, even if that means that we are not going to support all the latest stuff. At the same time, what are we sort of aiming for? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it makes sense to target new machines because, why care about, why not just use the GNOME desktop? So, earlier Sam mentioned that for OLPC, he had sold a bunch of classmate PCs with Ubuntu installed.
Or at the very least, OLPC has definitely done Ubuntu work. We do know that.
There's a US Kids on Computers. They have about 20 computer labs set up, and they just use Ubuntu. As I said, on this thread, Windows is coming. That I think that probably Sugar should just become an app. That Python GTK can run on Windows. It can run on Mac OS 10. And if Sugar was an application, and each activity was an application, and so Sugar was basically just a launcher, but you could launch an individual activity and it would have its own frame. There's a lot of users of Mac OS 10, there's a lot of Windows users, and there's a lot of GNOME, Ubuntu, whatever, and the idea of having, a distro is just, I don't know if it even makes sense to do that.
Well, I mean, anything that would make it easier to install for a teacher is worth looking at.
One thing I'd point out is, yes, it would be great to put sugar in the store, but historically stores have not liked nested stores, so you'd have to be careful about the approach.
Right. Well, so I think that's that Sean's point about teachers is interesting. I think when we were evaluating whether we would write the font editor in JavaScript or Python, then the main thing that kind of threw me was that I asked Lionel, how many teachers are there using Sugarizer? And he said, none. And so I'm not very motivated to make something with no users. And that when Walter, presented the project at Libra Planet, he says, "Oh, we have 3 million users."
Yes. How many are current? That is a fun thing. Even Bernie and I love saying is how do you prove who's current, and don't just use historical sales.
Right. So I mean, it's it's basically I think lies with statistics. It's somewhat true, but yeah, it's not a real number. And so yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, listen, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to turn in because it's my bedtime here. I'm slowing down.
No, I understand. Of course. Well, it's been great. Good to meet you in person.
Same here.
And maybe we can do another call. I'm going to be busy next week, but maybe we can do another call in a few weeks.
Sure. Sounds great.
In general, I think just the calls will be useful if we can have calls, because just to get things hashed quickly instead of writing a gazillion emails, but that's subject to people being able to attend them.
Right.
Right. I've tried to keep up with the minutes, so yeah, I'll post these on the list and we'll see what people say.
All right.
Sounds great. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye now.